Have you ever felt like just another number in a massive system, where justice seems reserved only for the powerful? Today, we bring you the story of an elderly woman who walked into a bank, determined to fight for what was rightfully hers. But no one could have predicted what happened next, when a figure of immense influence stepped in and turned the tide completely. Before we dive in, if you love stories of justice, perseverance, and shocking twists that challenge the status quo, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Because this is just the beginning of a journey you won't want to miss. The city of Philadelphia was cloaked in a heavy winter haze, the cold air biting through the layers of clothing that even the most prepared pedestrians wore. Liberty Trust Bank, located in the heart of downtown, stood as an imposing structure amidst the frost-laden streets. Its grand glass doors welcomed customers into a world where warmth was promised but seldom delivered. Inside, the bank buzzed with activity, though the atmosphere carried an undertone of tension and unease. As dawn broke over the city, the faint light filtering through the windows cast long shadows across the marble floors. The line at the teller counters stretched far into the lobby, each customer bearing their own unique story, some hopeful, others burdened by desperation. Among them was Eleanor Whitman, a frail woman in her late 70s whose presence seemed almost invisible against the bustling crowd. Her silver hair framed a face etched with years of hardship, and her eyes carried the weight of countless silent battles fought alone. Eleanor shuffled forward slowly, leaning heavily on her cane as she made her way toward the main counter. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just because of the biting cold outside but also due to the emotional chill that had enveloped her life for so many years. She carried with her a small envelope containing documents related to her account. A collection of papers that represented more than just numbers, they symbolized her dwindling independence and financial security. At the front of the queue, Candace Walker, a young teller with a polished demeanor, greeted customers with practiced efficiency. Her smile was bright but impersonal, her tone brisk as she moved from one transaction to the next. When Eleanor finally reached the counter, however, Candace's expression shifted slightly. It wasn't overtly rude, but there was an unmistakable lack of warmth in her greeting. "Good morning," Candace said, her voice clipped. "How may I assist you?" Eleanor hesitated, clutching the envelope tightly in her hands. "I need to discuss some discrepancies in my account," she began, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "There are fees I don't understand, and I believe they're incorrect." Candace nodded, though her attention seemed divided between Eleanor and the computer screen before her. "Let me pull up your account details," she replied, typing quickly. After a moment, she glanced back at Eleanor. "It looks like there were several maintenance charges applied recently. These are standard fees for inactive accounts." "But I've been using this account regularly," Eleanor protested, her voice rising slightly. "And these amounts seem excessive compared to what I was told initially." Candace frowned, her patience visibly thinning. "I can review the specifics if you'd like, but I'm afraid those charges are non-negotiable. If you have further questions, perhaps you should speak with someone in customer service." Before Eleanor could respond, another teller nearby chimed in. Stanley Carter, a middle-aged man with a perpetually sour expression, leaned over the counter and addressed Eleanor directly. "Ma'am, if you're having trouble understanding the fees, it might be best to schedule an appointment with our financial advisors. They can explain everything in detail." His tone was condescending, his words dripping with insincerity. Eleanor felt a pang of humiliation wash over her. Here she was, trying to resolve a legitimate issue, only to be met with indifference and dismissive attitudes. For a brief moment, she considered leaving without pressing the matter further. But something inside her refused to give up. This wasn't just about money, it was about dignity. "I would appreciate it if you could help me now," Eleanor insisted, her voice firmer this time. "These charges have caused significant hardship for me, and I deserve answers." Stanley sighed dramatically, rolling his eyes as he turned to face Eleanor fully. "Look, ma'am, we do our best to serve all customers equally, but sometimes people make mistakes or misinterpret information. Maybe you overlooked something when signing the terms and conditions." Eleanor's jaw tightened. How dare he imply that she was at fault? She had spent decades managing her finances responsibly, always adhering to the rules set forth by institutions like Liberty Trust Bank. Yet here she was, being treated as though her concerns were trivial or unworthy of attention. As the exchange continued, the atmosphere in the bank grew increasingly tense. Other customers began to notice the interaction, whispering amongst themselves about the elderly woman standing firm against the unyielding authority of the bank staff. Some exchanged sympathetic glances with Eleanor, while others appeared indifferent, absorbed in their own transactions. Despite the growing audience, Eleanor pressed on, determined to see justice done. Little did she know, however, that her quiet battle was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would challenge the very foundations of the system she had come to distrust. As Eleanor continued to argue her case, her voice steady but tinged with frustration, the atmosphere in the bank grew heavier. The other customers, once engrossed in their own affairs, now found themselves drawn into the unfolding drama. Some murmured softly among themselves, casting sidelong glances at the elderly woman who dared to challenge the authority of Liberty Trust Bank's employees. Others remained silent, observing the scene with a mixture of curiosity and unease. It was then that a figure emerged from the crowd, a man whose presence commanded attention even before he spoke. Donald Trump, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, stepped forward with an air of confidence that seemed almost theatrical. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail, before settling on Eleanor and the tellers behind the counter. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm yet authoritative, cutting through the murmur of voices like a knife through butter. "What seems to be the problem here?" The sudden interruption caused a ripple of surprise among the gathered customers. Whispers erupted as people recognized the former president, their initial shock quickly giving way to intrigue. How had he ended up in this small branch of Liberty Trust Bank? And more importantly, why was he involving himself in what appeared to be a mundane customer service dispute? Eleanor turned to face the newcomer, her expression a mix of confusion and cautious hope. "Sir," she began hesitantly, "I'm trying to resolve some issues with my account. There are fees I don't understand, and these charges have caused me significant financial strain." Trump nodded, stepping closer to the counter. His gaze shifted to Stanley Carter, who instinctively straightened his posture under the scrutiny. "And you, sir," Trump addressed him directly, "how do you explain these discrepancies?" Stanley cleared his throat, momentarily thrown off guard by the unexpected confrontation. "Sir, we operate according to strict procedures and regulations. These fees are standard for inactive accounts, and they're clearly outlined in the terms and conditions provided to all customers during account setup." Trump raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. "Standard procedures, you say? Yet this woman," he gestured toward Eleanor, "is experiencing difficulties that suggest otherwise. Perhaps it's time we took a closer look at those procedures." Before Stanley could respond, Trump turned his attention back to Eleanor. "May I see the documents you brought with you?" he asked gently. Relieved to find an ally, however unlikely, Eleanor handed over the envelope containing her account statements and related correspondence. As Trump reviewed the papers, his expression darkened. "These charges," he remarked after a moment, "are indeed excessive and lack proper justification. Furthermore, the language used in these documents is deliberately obscure, designed to confuse rather than inform." His words carried weight, resonating not only with Eleanor but also with the growing number of spectators. Several customers nodded in agreement, muttering complaints about similar experiences with their own accounts. The mood in the bank shifted perceptibly, the tension transforming into a collective sense of indignation. Candace Walker, sensing the changing tide, attempted to intervene. "Sir, I assure you that our policies comply with all legal requirements," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We strive to provide fair and transparent services to all our clients." Trump regarded her with a piercing stare. "Fair and transparent, you say? Then perhaps you wouldn't mind explaining why a senior citizen, someone who has contributed significantly to society throughout her life, is being penalized for something beyond her control." Candace faltered, unable to formulate a coherent response. Meanwhile, Stanley muttered something under his breath, earning a sharp glance from Trump. "If you have nothing constructive to add," he warned, "perhaps it's best to remain silent." With each passing minute, the situation became increasingly volatile. The once ordinary morning at Liberty Trust Bank had transformed into a battleground of sorts, where principles of fairness and accountability were being tested against the entrenched practices of corporate bureaucracy. And at the center of it all stood Eleanor Whitman, a symbol of resilience and determination, supported now by an unlikely champion. As the confrontation unfolded, whispers of the event began to spread outside the bank. Passers-by stopped to watch, their curiosity piqued by the sight of a high-profile figure engaging in what appeared to be a grassroots campaign for justice. Cell phones were pulled out, capturing images and videos that would soon circulate widely on social media platforms. For Eleanor, the experience was surreal. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined finding herself at the heart of such a public spectacle. Yet there was no denying the empowerment she felt in knowing that her voice, once dismissed as insignificant, was now being heard by many. The atmosphere inside Liberty Trust Bank had reached a boiling point. Donald Trump's presence had transformed what initially seemed like a routine customer service issue into a high-stakes confrontation between individual rights and institutional power. As he stood beside Eleanor Whitman, his towering figure casting a protective shadow over her frail form, the weight of his words reverberated through the room. "Let me make one thing clear," Trump declared, his voice firm and unwavering. "This is not just about fees or procedures. This is about respect for the people who entrust their hard-earned money to institutions like yours. And if those institutions fail to uphold basic standards of fairness and transparency, then they deserve to be held accountable." Stanley Carter, visibly uncomfortable under the scrutiny, attempted to regain control of the situation. "Sir, I understand your concerns," he began, though his tone lacked sincerity. "But as I've already explained, these charges are part of our standard operating protocols. They apply equally to all customers, regardless of their circumstances." Trump's lips curled into a wry smile. "Standard operating protocols, you say? Then perhaps you wouldn't mind explaining why someone like Mrs. Whitman, who has likely been a loyal customer for decades, is treated with such disregard." Before Stanley could respond, Candace Walker interjected, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "We try our best to assist every customer, but sometimes misunderstandings occur. Maybe Mrs. Whitman overlooked certain details when she opened her account." Eleanor's face flushed with anger at the implication that she was somehow at fault. "I read everything carefully," she protested, her voice trembling with emotion. "And even if I hadn't, does that justify charging me exorbitant fees without proper explanation?" Trump placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Exactly my point," he said, turning back to the tellers. "It's not enough to simply state the rules, you must ensure that they're communicated clearly and fairly. Otherwise, what purpose do they serve other than to exploit those who may not fully understand them?" His words struck a chord with several onlookers, who began murmuring in agreement. Some nodded emphatically, while others exchanged knowing glances. The tide of public opinion was clearly shifting against the bank employees, whose attempts to justify their actions now appeared increasingly hollow. Sensing the growing unrest, Walter Stevens, the branch manager, emerged from his office. A tall man with graying hair and a perpetually harried expression, he approached the counter with cautious steps. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of unease. Trump turned to face him, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Mr. Stevens, I assume?" he said, extending a hand. "Donald Trump. I believe we have some matters to discuss regarding your institution's treatment of its customers." Walter hesitated before shaking hands, clearly taken aback by the unexpected encounter. "Of course, Mr. Trump. Perhaps we could move this conversation to my office." "By all means," Trump replied, gesturing for Eleanor to join them. As the trio moved toward the manager's office, the crowd parted reluctantly, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. For many, this was more than just a dispute. It was a symbol of the broader struggle between corporate greed and consumer rights. Once inside the office, Walter took a seat behind his desk, flanked by Stanley and Candace. Trump remained standing, his imposing figure dominating the small space. "Let's get straight to the point," he began. "Mrs. Whitman has raised legitimate concerns about her account, concerns that reflect systemic issues within your organization. How do you propose to address them?" Walter sighed, rubbing his temples as he considered his response. "Look, I can't deny that mistakes happen," he admitted reluctantly. But we operate within strict regulatory frameworks, and our policies are designed to protect both the bank and its customers. Trump leaned forward, his expression stern. Protecting customers doesn't mean burying them under layers of confusing jargon and hidden fees. If your goal is truly to serve the community, then you need to reevaluate how you communicate with and treat your clients. Candace shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. "We do our best," she muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Your best isn't good enough," Trump countered sharply. "Not when it results in situations like this one. Now, I want you to conduct a thorough review of Mrs. Whitman's account, identify any discrepancies, and rectify them immediately. Furthermore, I expect you to implement measures to prevent similar issues from occurring in the future." Walter nodded slowly, realizing that resistance would only escalate the situation. "We'll look into it," he promised, though his words carried little weight compared to the gravity of the moment. As the meeting drew to a close, Trump turned to Eleanor, offering her a reassuring smile. "You've done an incredible job standing up for yourself today," he said. "And rest assured, this won't go unnoticed." With that, the group returned to the main lobby, where the assembled crowd awaited news of the outcome. Though the immediate conflict had been resolved, the seeds of change had been planted, and they were sure to take root in the days and weeks to come. In the days following the confrontation at Liberty Trust Bank, a ripple effect began to spread through the institution and beyond. Walter Stevens, under mounting pressure from both internal audits and external scrutiny, initiated a comprehensive review of the bank's policies and practices. The findings were damning. Evidence of systemic biases favoring wealthier clients, opaque fee structures, and inadequate customer service protocols came to light, forcing the bank to confront uncomfortable truths about its operations. Donald Trump's involvement had ignited a firestorm of public interest, with news outlets across the country picking up the story. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions about corporate accountability and consumer rights, amplifying Eleanor Whitman's plight into a rallying cry for reform. For many, her quiet determination became a symbol of resistance against entrenched injustices within the financial sector. Eleanor herself found herself caught in the whirlwind of attention, though she remained humble throughout. Interviews and articles highlighted her courage in challenging the status quo, drawing comparisons to historical figures who had stood firm in the face of adversity. Yet despite the newfound recognition, Eleanor's primary concern remained personal, resolving the issues that had brought her to the bank in the first place. The results of the investigation confirmed what Eleanor had long suspected: the fees levied against her account were indeed unjustified, stemming from outdated systems and flawed processes. Walter Stevens, eager to restore the bank's tarnished reputation, personally delivered the news to Eleanor during a follow-up meeting. "Mrs. Whitman," he began, his tone contrite, "on behalf of Liberty Trust Bank, I want to sincerely apologize for the difficulties you've experienced. Our team has reviewed your account thoroughly, and we've identified several errors that should not have occurred. As part of our commitment to making amends, we will be refunding all disputed charges and waiving any associated penalties." Eleanor listened intently, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and vindication. "Thank you," she replied softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of struggle finally lifted. "This means more to me than just money, it's about knowing that my voice mattered." Walter nodded solemnly. "We understand that trust is hard-earned and easily broken. That's why we're taking steps to ensure this doesn't happen again. Not just for you, but for all our customers. We're revising our fee structures, enhancing transparency measures, and implementing training programs to improve customer service standards." As word of the reforms spread, other customers began coming forward with their own stories of mistreatment. Inspired by Eleanor's example, they too demanded answers, and received them. Liberty Trust Bank, once seen as an unyielding fortress of bureaucracy, was forced to adapt to the demands of an increasingly vocal public. For Eleanor, the experience marked a turning point in her life. No longer did she feel invisible or powerless. Instead, she embraced her role as an advocate for fairness and justice. She attended community meetings, shared her story with local organizations, and worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the importance of holding institutions accountable. Meanwhile, Donald Trump continued to champion causes related to consumer protection, leveraging his platform to highlight similar cases nationwide. His unexpected alliance with Eleanor had sparked a movement, one rooted in the belief that even the smallest voices deserve to be heard. As winter gave way to spring, Philadelphia shed its icy grip, and with it, the chill of indifference that had once permeated Liberty Trust Bank. In its place grew something new, a sense of hope, renewal, and promise for a future where justice and compassion could coexist. As the days turned into weeks, the impact of Eleanor Whitman's stand at Liberty Trust Bank continued to resonate far beyond the confines of that single branch. The movement she had inadvertently sparked grew stronger with each passing day, fueled by the collective outrage and determination of countless individuals who had faced similar injustices. Donald Trump, ever the catalyst for change, used his influence to amplify their voices, ensuring that the conversation remained at the forefront of public discourse. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Philadelphia's frost-covered streets, a small gathering took place inside the very same bank where it had all begun. This time, however, the atmosphere was markedly different. No longer tense or hostile, but charged with a sense of unity and purpose. Customers, employees, and community leaders alike filled the spacious lobby, their faces illuminated by the soft light of chandeliers overhead. At the center of the room stood Donald Trump, flanked by Eleanor Whitman and Walter Stevens. The trio represented an unlikely alliance, one forged in the crucible of adversity and strengthened by shared goals. As the crowd settled into silence, Trump stepped forward to address them, his voice carrying the weight of both authority and empathy. "Today," he began, "we gather here not just to celebrate victory, but to reaffirm our commitment to a better future. A future where fairness and compassion are not mere ideals, but guiding principles. What started as one woman's fight against injustice has evolved into a movement that transcends borders and backgrounds. It reminds us that even in the coldest, darkest times, hope can still shine through." His words struck a chord with those present, evoking nods of agreement and murmurs of approval. Eleanor, standing beside him, felt a surge of pride and gratitude. She had never imagined herself as a leader, yet here she was, contributing to something far greater than herself. Walter Stevens followed Trump's speech with a statement of his own, acknowledging the lessons learned and outlining the steps the bank would take to ensure lasting change. "We recognize that rebuilding trust is not a one-time effort, but an ongoing journey," he declared. "To that end, we will establish independent oversight committees, implement stricter compliance measures, and prioritize customer feedback in all decision-making processes." The audience responded with applause, their enthusiasm underscoring the transformative power of collaboration. For many, this marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Liberty Trust Bank, but for the broader financial industry as a whole. As the event drew to a close, Eleanor found herself surrounded by well-wishers, each eager to express their admiration and gratitude. Among them was a young woman named Maya, whose story mirrored Eleanor's in many ways. "You gave me the courage to speak up," Maya confessed, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you for showing us what's possible when we stand together." Eleanor smiled warmly, her heart swelling with emotion. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "It was all of us, every person who refused to stay silent, who chose to fight for what's right. That's what makes change possible." Outside, the winter wind howled softly, its icy breath brushing against the glass doors of the bank. Yet within, warmth radiated from the bonds formed that night, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As Eleanor stepped into the crisp air, she paused for a moment, gazing upward at the star-studded sky. Despite the cold, she felt an undeniable sense of peace. A peace born of knowing that her voice, once so easily dismissed, had now become a beacon of hope for others. And so, amidst the quiet beauty of a winter's night, a powerful message took root, that no matter how daunting the challenges may seem, there is always strength in standing together, and always light in the darkness. What started as a simple dispute in a cold winter morning has now ignited a fire that refuses to be put out. But how will the financial powers that be respond? And could this be the beginning of an even greater showdown? Hit subscribe now to stay tuned, because this battle for justice is far from over.